Hi, this is People for Peace and Justice. I'm Kyle Silliman-Smith, one of the co-hosts. We're really excited to do this show today, our very first episode, and we have guests here. So we're going to start with introductions. I'll give it to Kina to introduce herself as the other co-host, and then we'll just go around the table.
Hi, I'm Kina Thorpe. I am the program coordinator at the Peace and Justice Center.
I'm Hayley. I'm a programming intern for fall of 2018.
And I'm Kenzie, and I'm a racial justice intern for the fall of 2018 as well.
Great. So we're going to start off by talking about what brought you to this work in general, in a general sense.
Do you want to go first? I'll go first. So I'm a recent UVM graduate. I studied political science, and as soon as I moved to Burlington, I knew that I wanted to be involved in my community, and I wanted to learn about how I could do that to the best of my abilities and learn and grow in that way.
Yeah, similarly, I go to UVM right now, and I'm studying sociology. And while my classes are great at UVM, I was really looking for an experience to supplement that which I'm learning in the classroom, and to build some real world experience that I can apply to my classes, and so far it has really done that.
Great. And so I'm going to also introduce myself because this is the first of our particular show, and hopefully if people are into it, then they'll find out more about both Kina and I as we go on. So I started at the Peace and Justice Center in 2012, and over the course of that time have done a variety of different jobs. And I'm really excited for this show, and also in general, and also for this particular show with you two, because I think that the work that we've been doing in workshops, especially in racial justice workshops, is a lot more hearty and meaningful to communities throughout Vermont than what the description of the particular workshop captures. And I personally am participating in racial justice workshops as a white person in Vermont, really excited to work with white people in seeing and disrupting racism. I grew up in Vermont. I lived much of my life in Vermont, either through growing up or coming back here after being away. Even when I was away, it was in predominantly white spaces, and I just think there's not that many opportunities for white communities, or predominantly white communities, or perceived to be white communities, to talk about racism or even see it. It's just so dominant in the books that we read, in the news that we absorb, in the way that we learn history, that then when something happens in a white community, like people of color move to the space, or they are called out for some policy or practice that is racist, there's such a huge reaction. And so it's exciting for me to do this work as a white person within white communities, and in a more personal way, even within my own family and friend groups and workspaces, so that there can be conversations that happen about race and racism without there needing to be the presence of a person of color or some sort of massive exposure of racism, but just all of the subtle racism that exists and that we perpetuate and feed into is something that is very meaningful to me, and I continue to learn even as a facilitator in these workshops all the time. So I'm excited to hear more about both of your experience, to continue to explore with Kina as well, how the work is ongoing and is hopefully moving people into sustained long-term change, and not just something that they're like, oh good, now that I went to this workshop, I can check that box, or now I know everything there is to know about race and racism. And I just feel really compelled to do it specifically with white folks and white communities. So that is a little bit of what brought me here to this work and to this conversation that we're gonna sort of have today.
And I was born and raised in Vermont, in the Burlington area, in the Montpelier area, and so being a dark-skinned biracial woman has really forced me to have these conversations, whether I want to or not. But when I finally decided that these were conversations that I needed to have, it was because I was seeing all of the things that were happening in my community. And like Kyle said, a lot of it came from the presence of like me and other people of color that these things were exposed. And so it's really important for me to do this work because this is my community. Like, these are the people that I grew up with. They were my neighbors, my aunts, my uncles, my teachers. And so it's really important for me to be able to do my part in making Vermont a more aware state. So that way, hopefully, at some point, other people of color won't have to experience the same things. And hopefully so that white people can be freed from the racism that exists within them. So that's what brought me to this work.
So now that we're sort of into a little bit what the programming is like, specifically the racial justice programming, can one of you or both of you together sort of chat about some of the programs that you participated in and possibly the impact of them? You could, I don't want to limit it too much, just like talk how you'd like, but I'm especially interested in knowing some of the sort of gritty details of it without violating any confidentiality. And then also, like, if there was an impact that you believe will be more long-term beyond just what happens in the space.
Well, for myself personally, I went into this internship kind of knowing that I was going to get something I didn't expect, no matter what expectation I had, just because of the nature of the work that I thought we would be doing. And I feel like the workshops have taught me a lot about how little I know and how I will continue to have new things to figure out and understand and think about. And doing a lot of that through conversation and interaction, be it in a workshop or with people in my life or in my community or my family, I've learned a lot about how to initiate conversations and how to carry them on and how to understand that it's an ongoing process that I want to continue to be a part of.
So I guess like coming into this internship, I didn't realize how big programs would be as a part of what I would be doing on a daily basis. But as you have mentioned earlier, the BC Justice Center runs many programs, and a lot of them are focused on racial justice. And so as interns, we go and like sit in and participate in them. And another important part about them is that we're assigned homework assignments each week, which include like articles and reflections. And so this past semester, we attended a program at UVM called Building Empathy and Addressing Racial Oppression. And it was the first racial justice program I had ever attended. And before this internship, I considered myself like a fairly educated person who could recognize like systemic racism. However, as Hayley mentioned, like when I got to the program, I realized how much I still had to learn. And one of the homework assignments during like the first few weeks was to write a racial autobiography. And I'm from a small town in Wisconsin that is predominantly white. My family is all white. I went to high school in a majority white high school. And so I guess like growing up, I always thought of race as something that other people possessed, but that I didn't. And saying that now, it sounds like pretty naive, which it is. And I guess I just never recognized whiteness in myself and the history and privilege that comes with that. And so writing this racial autobiography was like a really impactful experience for me because I realized how much of my childhood wasn't defined by race and how that exactly plays into white privilege because I never have to think about my skin color on a daily basis. And I think a really unique thing about the JC internship is that every day I go in, I'm forced to like face that discomfort and face that hardship about thinking about my race and my identity in that way. And oftentimes I feel relieved when I leave the Peace and Justice Center, like, oh, all right, I'm done with that work for today. And again, that's just like white privilege, because I can just leave that behind and be like, all right, I did my work, while people of color have to face that on a daily basis, moment to moment.
Mm-hmm. And I think a big thing I realized about privilege too is that it's very important to actively disrupt racism when you see it. And for a long time, I had seen it and done what I thought needed to be done, but going to workshops has taught me how to see it in real time, how to engage with people in a way that doesn't necessarily make them feel defensive or angry, but actually like constitutes like meaningful discussion about why so many attitudes and behaviors are so problematic and so damaging to so many people.
Yeah, so building empathy and addressing racial oppression was a workshop that we did at UVM with staff at UVM, and both of you participated as interns. Is there anything that stood out as like a meaningful part of that process for you?
Mm-hmm. There was I have one particular moment that I think of pretty frequently when we were doing role plays, and there were a couple people I was engaging with within a small group, and we were working through the role play, and these were people who believed that they were fully engaging in the work and receiving it appropriately, but actually were continuing to fail to see their problematic behavior and perspectives. And I remember trying to disrupt the racism within a workshop about disrupting racism and seeing how that is so common, like in all kinds of spaces, and how it is challenging and it's an ongoing challenge, but it's something that I want to continue to think about and address and bring up with people in my personal life, at my home life, work life, all aspects. And I hope those people are still doing the work themselves too.
Yeah, and I think that just plays back to your point at the beginning, like these workshops, I think you said like a lot of people think that the people who sign up for them already like know everything about racism, and you're just preaching to the choir. But after this experience we had, I realized like that's so not true. And like a lot of people I like realized showed up and are like, oh, like we know it, like we got it. And then when it comes to role playing, and I'm so included in this, I just like, we feel like uncomfortable because it is uncomfortable work. And so I think everyone has a lot to learn by attending these workshops, like no matter like how comfortable or not, how educated do you feel about racism and racial justice.
The both of you talked about role playing. So how have you taken like the things that you did in the role plays into real life?
I feel like when I encounter racism or problematic behavior, I feel much more equipped to communicate with those people instead of just calling them out or angrily expressing like my frustration. I feel like I've learned a lot about how to be comfortable talking with people that I care about things that are important, and therefore making them feel more comfortable, like confronting their own racism instead of getting defensive and angry. I feel like I've learned so much more how to have like an actually engaging and productive conversation, which is invaluable, I feel like. Especially being a white person who is in predominantly white spaces a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like one like light bulb moment for me during the workshop was we were like going through and role playing, and I was the person who was disrupting the racism in that situation. And during one role play, I just like came back with like a bunch of facts, like, oh, well, like people of color are like incarcerated like 10 times the amount of like 10 times the amount than white people, and I was just going on and like, oh, like look at our history, blah blah blah. And I think one of the facilitators mentioned like that those facts are important. However, like when you just like list them off, that person's just gonna like shut down and just tune you out. But it's like that emotion that really helps you like connect with them, and that that, like, by showing them that what they're saying is hurting you, as well as like a lot of other people, I think I learned like that's the most effective way to like truly disrupt that racism. And that was really meaningful for me because I had never thought about it in that way before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. Kina and I co-facilitate a bunch of workshops together, and so sometimes we co-facilitate so many that we can like compare the dynamics of the different groups in like interesting ways. And that is a typical thing, is that people come in and they do a role play and they just like information vomit on other people, like, oh, all of this. And also we had a workshop recently where it was like the total polar opposite, which I've never experienced at the level that was there, which I didn't expect, just like going to the point of like, there's always so many unexpected things, but people were going so much heart to heart when it was like, clearly there's no foundation of education. So that is something else that we were working with that group, is like, how do you deliver some foundational information without being the person who knows everything? Like, hey, let's have a movie night and watch 13th. You know, like, hey, I'm just gonna send you a couple articles that I just read recently and it was like really meaningful to me, you know, just to be like, I'm not above you, I just happen to have this information. I think that you should read it too, so that then we can have a more productive conversation about this, you know, but it's like interesting that we experience the opposite version.
Yeah, I think it's hard for people to find the balance, because I feel like people feel like they have to be either one way or the other. Like you either have to be throwing facts at them so that they can understand it, or you have to be on the same emotional level as them as a way to like calm them down and make them feel not bad about what they said or what they did. And I mean, I think that with any person engaging in any kind of work, that's something that's really difficult to find that balance. So even with us, that's still something that you know, we're working on a daily basis, because that's how you're really going to reach people and have an impact with what you're saying, not like what Kyle said, just like throwing stats at them.
Yeah, and also not just being like, I totally get it, I totally understand, of course you meant well and it affected me, I am the one that is the most affected. Because if you take that to the extreme, it's like, also like tons of other people, you know, like you said. So it's just like, there's a lot of interesting information that we get out of it, and I think you're exactly right, Kina, that like there's stuff that we learn from the workshop too, just like how to differently facilitate, and then also how to engage, like, oh yeah, I guess that could happen, or like maybe that happened there. Yeah. Okay, so should we move on to like other aspects of the internship? We're about to, next week we'll be starting interviews for interns for the spring, and so maybe if they're accepting, we can send them this video. Like, listen, this is actually what it's like.
Welcome.
So more of like the nitty gritty of like the internship. Like, what did you expect? What was like hard? What was good? You know, what were some challenges? Whatever.
Go first. Okay, so in addition to doing workshops, one of my favorite experiences from the internship, and it's a very specific one, I remember I went with Rachel Siegel, the director of the Peace and Justice Center, to Shelburne Farms, and we joined Cultivating Pathways to Sustainability, and it was a day meant for elementary and middle school children to engage with organizations in their communities who were focusing on a lot of different work. And it was the first time that I had done social justice work working with children particularly. And we did a small workshop. We had them do a human sculpture. We talked about oppression. We talked about justice. It was really interesting. And it's something that I continue to think about, how enriching that experience was and how hands-on it was to talk to kids about issues that are important, which is something that I had never done before. And then on top of that, just understanding the day-to-day work of a nonprofit organization and what needs to get done to promote the work that we do and to get people involved. I feel like I learned a lot about that as well, just in a real-time experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect when I like signed up for it, really. I was just like, oh, this sounds cool. But yeah, I definitely learned like how much hard work goes behind it, and like a big role that we do as interns is we do a lot of like social media and just like promoting our various events. And so like it's been a learning curve for me to like learn how to like schedule tweets and like read articles and then like write a blurb about them, which are all like I think really valuable tools for the future. And what else? Yeah, another thing that we've done is like write articles about like various sources that we read, or like if there's a topic that we'll all talk about. That has been really valuable too.
I feel like engaging with the community too. Like I feel like I personally have been able to meet activist groups and people who do work in the community that I wouldn't have been able to meet otherwise, and learned how important process is in like creating an event and fighting for something that you think is important, or like getting information out into the community, like what steps to take in order to do that effectively, and with all different kinds of perspectives and voices as well.
Yeah, definitely. I remember like one day I like came in and I was just sat down to like start my work, and then this guy comes in from, I forget what organization, but he made these huge banners that were like anti-ICE. And he needed someone to take a photo with in front of some governmental building. I'm like really blanking right now. But Rachel I was like, all right, Kenzie, like, do you mind going? So I was like, okay. And so that was like whisked off, and like we went in front of this government building, and like 5 people we asked to take our photo like right away denied us. And I was like, what? Like, aren't we in this like liberal bubble of like Burlington? And I'm like, wow, like my perception of this place like is definitely like skewed, and like I like just like realized like how much injustice still like exists in these spaces that we deem progressive. That was a little tangent, but then we took a photo and stuff, and then we like returned. It was just like a crazy experience, and I was like these are things I never would experience in my like daily life like otherwise. And then afterwards I like proceeded to like look up a lot of information about ICE, like which I wouldn't have, I don't think, otherwise. So I think like a really valuable thing is just like staying like on top of like contemporary news and like having these experiences that I definitely would never have if I was just at school buried in my books.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something that Kyle and I had talked about, I don't know, maybe last week or something. I have no sense of time. But how, and this goes back to some of the stuff we talked about in regards to role playing, about how people, you know, they read a lot of books, they read a lot of articles, and so they think that they have this wealth of knowledge, and maybe they do, but then to be able to apply it in real life is such a different, there's such a difference. And so, like you said, I think it's important to, on top of, you know, going to class and writing papers and reading books, to be able to actually go out there and engage with the community and, you know, put all of that knowledge to work, because the knowledge is only so good if it just stays in your head. And maybe the things that you think you know, like you said, like you don't actually know. So I think that is one of the best parts of our internships is you're not just like sitting and reading and well, you do that, but you know, like the opportunity to be able to actually go out there and see what it's like to be an activist, and to hone those skills in a very practical way and not just by reading some articles. Yeah.
And I feel like there were a lot of moments too where I was asked or given an opportunity to do something, and there was a voice in my head that was like, no, that's scary, I don't want to do that. And then I was like, no, you have to do it. And being pushed in that way, I think, is so rewarding and so important. And even going to marches and participating and speaking has been something that was so scary when I started this internship, but I kind of had no choice in the best way possible to just like deal with it and learn from it and figure out how to use that to my advantage and to the advantage of other people.
And we do put interns in uncomfortable positions. And we also are thoughtful about being supportive to individuals that we're asking to do this work. And I think about that in looking at you, Hayley, because I have taken you to several meetings that I knew were going to be really challenging, emotionally charged, and with individuals who are not used to being challenged in the way that we are going to challenge the work, the process, like you said. And I think that's something to put out there, you know, that this internship and the work that we do with our programming team, which interns are a part of as our volunteers, as our programming staff, it's really a team, that we work to put people in challenging positions, but also continue to check in with them, continue to see how it's going. We have weekly programming meetings, and also other opportunities to be like, hey, how was that? Was that too much? You know, and in a way that I hope helps people be more prepared for doing social justice work in an ongoing way, knowing that this work is different than a lot of other jobs that aren't charged with such huge systems of oppression that show up in a million different ways, a million different times. And it's like, yes, you're going to an organizing meeting to take on this system of oppression, but those systems are still present in the meeting. So like, you're fighting with these colleagues to take on this system, but you're actually having to also disrupt it in the space, and how exhausting that can be. And I hope that for many of our interns, we're putting them in that exhausting, like, challenging situation, but also providing enough support so that they can continue, they can like practice and then continue to do it in whatever field they choose to go into. And for past interns, there have been times when 2 years after an internship is over, an intern will reach out and be like, okay, I'm in the belly of the beast. And like, I just need some grounding because like I'm taking on some messed up situation. And it's good for us to be able to be like, we're not there. Like, we're not in the belly of the beast, but we can provide some like human support for that. So that's just something I want to acknowledge about your internship in particular, that like there have been some challenging dynamics, and some of them I haven't even been there for, and instead just like followed up with.
And I just learned so much. I wouldn't have learned the things that I learned in any other way than by being put in those situations.
Yeah, and which goes back to what you were saying, Kina, is like practice. Like actually practicing, being like, this is uncomfortable and exhausting, and like it has to be done if we're taking on these huge entities.
And I think that it's especially important getting that experience in an internship where you're surrounded by people to support you, because like this is exactly how it is out in the real world, and you might not always have that support system behind you in order just to like help you process things, to help you prevent burnout, all of that stuff. So the work that you do in an internship, at least with us, is not at all different from the work that you'd be doing if you were working in organizing, because you're doing all of the same stuff that we're doing. So I think that it's really good practice for when you actually get out there.
Definitely.
Also, just like one more thing that ties into this and like some other stuff that was being said about role plays, is that sometimes the people that have the least amount of confidence in their experience with something actually will have the best skills to take it on. So like in workshops, sometimes the people who have done the most reading, the most educating of themselves are like the hardest to get to like be real in role playing. But sometimes people who just talk about it to their friends and family, but they don't have the like academic background are like brilliant at role playing. And I think the same for sometimes with interns is like we hire interns who are like, ooh, I'm not necessarily you two. Like, oh, I may not be the best candidate for this or that reason, but it's just because they don't necessarily have the like the confidence and the language that other times we've hired interns that seem to have the confidence and the language, and then they just can't fit in with the team atmosphere that we bring. They're like, no, I know what's best. No, I know what's best. And they're like harming themselves in like building community and collaboration, which is something that we focus so much on. So I just think like another point to put out there is like, sometimes if you think you're way not ready for it, like just practice it. You might be more ready than somebody who believes themselves to like be the boss of everything. Yeah. Do we have last final remarks? I think we're almost done.
Well, I'm very sad that my internship is going to be over soon. That's something I've been reflecting a lot lately, but I'm also very grateful for the experience and very excited, and I'm already thinking about ways in which I can take what I've learned and carry onward.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better. It's been such a great community, and we've talked about not only connecting to the larger Burlington community, but Kina, you mentioned like having like the community of the Peace and Justice Center, and so did you, Kyle, of like that support. And I think that's been like one of the most meaningful things about this internship.
Yay.
Cool. Well, that's all the time that we have. Thank you for joining us. If you're interested in attending some of our programming, our next program is happening on December 8th at the Peace and Justice Center. It's Seeing and Disrupting Racism. It's a 1-hour drop-in program. But if you want more information, you can visit us at pjcvt.org, or you can send us an email at program@pjcvt.org.
Thank you.